Welcome, wherever you are, and however your day has been. This is your moment to rest. You've found your way here to a quiet place, far from notifications, bright lights, or rushing thoughts. This is your time to slow down, to breathe deeply, to set down the weight of the day and drift gently into another time. As the story unfolds, you'll begin a long journey, not forward but backward, centuries into the past, to an age often romanticized, sometimes feared, and frequently misunderstood. The medieval era, you might think of castles and knights, dragons in dusty books, kings and queens on golden thrones. But tonight, we won't be following the tales of legend or glory. Instead, we'll walk through the ordinary world, the quiet, hard, deeply human reality that most people in that time knew. And to help guide your mind toward rest, you'll notice a layer of soothing music accompanying the story, a soft, steady current beneath the narration. It's there to support you, not to distract. A calming rhythm to match your breath, to let you float as the words carry you. We'll begin in the stillness of early morning, somewhere far from the present. And when you wake again, you'll be home. Now, close your eyes if you haven't already. Let the story begin. The rhythm of the common day. Immersion in medieval daily life. Imagine yourself waking not to the sound of an alarm, but to the distant clang of a bell. Not a digital chime, but a dull, metallic ring carried on morning mist echoing from a simple stone church nestled in the heart of your village. You live in a small, timber-framed home, shared with your family, your animals, and the ever-present cold. There is no insulation, no glass window, only a shutter to push open, revealing the faint light of dawn pressing through smoke-laced fog. The air is heavy with the scent of ash and wool. Your straw mattress crackles beneath you as you rise. Your breath fogs in the chill, though it is spring, and the birdsong has already begun outside. There is no bathroom, of course, no running water, just a pail for the night and a short walk to the communal well. Your shoes, if you have them, are made of leather and twine. They are stiff, damp, and worn. Breakfast is not a meal of choices. It is likely a rough brown bread dense, with flecks of husk still caught in the grain. If you are lucky, there may be a smear of soft cheese or yesterday's leftover broth, warm with garlic and onion. Your hands are never clean by modern standards. They are stained from soil, from grease, from handling livestock. You would not think to wash them before eating. Outside, the road is not paved. It is not even dry. It is churned by hooves and feet, a thick path of mud. The air smells of manure, of damp wool cloaks drying on wooden pegs, and faintly of smoke from the hearths. Your daily work depends on your station. Most likely, you are a peasant, by far the majority of the population. And your hours are not tracked by clock, but by sunlight and season. If it is spring, you sow. If it is summer, you reap. If it is winter, you repair. And always, always, you serve the landowner. The Lord's manor looms in the distance. Its stone walls are weathered but enduring. You do not enter it. You owe it labor, or rent, or tithes. It protects you, in theory, but you fear it more than you admire it. Your entire life is lived within a circle of a few miles. The next village is a day's walk away. The thought of distant lands, Italy, Africa, Byzantium is as abstract as the stars. But you do know stories. At night, when the work is done and the sky turns deep velvet, the hearth becomes the center of all meaning. Stories are told in quiet voices of saints and demons, of fairies in the forest, of cursed travelers and long-dead kings. Candles are dear, so light is borrowed from the fire. Shadows flicker across faces. The smell of the day's labor lingers on everyone's skin. And outside, in the dark, wolves still prowl. Sleep is not a single block, but broken into two. You might rise at midnight to tend to the fire, to check on animals, to whisper a prayer, then back to bed until the sun returns. There is no privacy and little quiet, but there is rhythm. Always the same tasks, the same tools, the same dirt worn into the same grooves of your fingers. A life not of decisions, but of repetitions. A life tied to land and sky and duty. It is not a romantic life, but it is not a hopeless one either. Imagine yourself in it, even for a moment. Your survival would depend not on strength, but on submission to the routine. The quiet relentlessness of necessity. The year is not 2025, it is 1325. And already you are tired. The life of a forgotten knight, the world of Sir Aldrich, now that we have wandered through the thatched roofs and hand-tilled fields of the medieval peasantry, let us lift the veil slightly higher into the muted world of low nobility. It's easy to picture medieval knights as gallant warriors, shining, resolute, larger than life. But most knights were not heroes in songs. They were men, bound by duty, shaped by circumstance, hemmed in by obligations both sacred and mundane. This is the story of Sir Aldrich of Linford, a man almost completely forgotten by time. A knight not remembered for triumphs or cruelty, not etched into scroll or legend, but who lived, and who bore the weight of his title with steady endurance. The year is 1278, and you are in his world now. A modest hall of stone and timber. Smoke curling through the central hearth, staining the rafters above with a charcoal haze that never fully fades. Walls that leak cold, a silence that seems to settle like dust in the corners of every room. Sir Aldrich awakens early, before the sun reaches over the hills of Linford. His chamber is bare, a straw-stuffed mattress, a coarse woolen blanket, a wooden chest containing his surcoat, letters, and an old prayer book. There is no glass in the windows, only wooden shutters that creak in the wind. He dresses slowly, a padded gambeson, simple leggings, and boots caked with the dried traces of earlier rides. Over this, he drapes a cloak bearing the worn emblem of his house, known by fewer each year. There are no servants bustling around him. Just Gareth, his young squire, half asleep and mumbling apologies as he struggles to fasten Aldrich's belt correctly. Breakfast is plain. Stale bread soaked in broth, a wedge of hard cheese, and small beer-diluted ale, safer than water. It is consumed without fanfare. There is no dining table spread with silver, no music or merriment. Just the crackle of fire and the distant lowing of oxen. Outside, the world is grey and damp. The fields stretch in irregular patterns, some recently ploughed, others lying fallow. Aldrich rides the perimeter, his horse steady, his pace unhurried. He pauses at the mill, where the wheel churns slowly in the current, turning with a groaning rhythm. The reeve approaches him with a quiet report. 2 hogs missing. A tenant claims wolves, another claims poachers. Aldrich listens, nods, and offers no harsh judgment. He knows the truth likely lies somewhere between desperation and mischief. Punishment is a last resort. Every working hand matters. When he returns to the hall, a messenger awaits. The parchment he carries is crinkled and sealed in green wax. A summons from his liege, lord, to attend a gathering next fortnight. Aldrich sighs softly. It means a ride of 3 days, muddy roads, and the awkward rituals of courtly exchange. but it is expected of him. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, Aldrich practices with his sword in the courtyard, not out of vanity, but necessity. A knight must be prepared. Gareth watches, mimicking his form with a wooden stick. Aldrich corrects him gently, not with words, but with the slight repositioning of a foot, the tilt of a shoulder. Later, they tend to the horses together, brushing their coats, checking hooves for stone. The stable smells of hay and warmth. Unlike the cold stone hall, evening begins early in winter. The sun dips before supper, casting long shadows across the walls. Supper itself is humble. Boiled barley, a bit of salted fish, and a few shriveled apples from the manor orchard. Conversation is minimal. The fire does most of the talking. The inner world of a minor knight, when night falls fully, Aldrich sits beside the hearth. The fire's glow flickers across his face, softening the angles worn by time and wind. Gareth has retired. The hounds curl near the flames. Outside an owl calls once, then is silent. A travelling cleric has left behind a copy of Boethius the Consolation of Philosophy. Aldrich cannot read Latin fluently, but he remembers the verses recited aloud by the cleric the week before. He closes his eyes and repeats what fragments he can recall. Nothing is miserable unless you think it so. He turns the words over like stones in a stream. His thoughts often drift at this hour. He remembers his father, who died in a skirmish defending their land. He remembers his brother, lost to illness one bitter spring. He remembers a girl he once intended to marry, a lord's daughter whose dowry was promised elsewhere in the end. There is no bitterness, only a soft ache. The past sits with him like another figure at the fire. Sometimes he dreams of the east, of the Holy Land, of strange cities beyond the sea, of markets filled with silk and spice. But these are just fragments from the stories told by passing pilgrims. He has never travelled more than 100 miles from Linford. Still, he maintains his armour. It hangs on the wall, a hauberk of chainmail, dented but intact. His sword, forged in York, is kept oiled and sharp, not for battle, but for ceremony, for presence. Appearances still matter, even in obscurity. Once a year, he oversees the Assize of Arms, a review of the village men who must present their weapons and declare their readiness to defend the realm. Most carry little more than wooden clubs or rusted spears. Aldrich inspects them all, nods, and quietly hopes never to call them to true defense. At Mass, he kneels quietly. He is not devout, but consistent. The Latin chants echo in the cold chapel, mixing with the flickering light of tallow candles. He does not understand every word, but the rhythm comforts him. The seasons pass, years, to children he once saw crawling in the mud, now till fields of their own. Gareth grows tall, his voice deepening. Aldrich gives him more responsibility, counting stores, writing messages, overseeing disputes. And then, one winter, Aldrich grows ill. Not suddenly, just a slow fading, less energy in the limbs, more coughing, a lingering weariness that never quite lifts. He remains upright, overseeing tasks, but with less clarity. He dreams more often, sleeps longer, eats little. One morning, he does not rise. The fire is low, the air chilled. The dogs wait beside the door, confused. Gareth finds him, still and silent, one hand resting loosely on the prayer book he kept by his bed. There is no grand funeral, just a quiet burial beneath a stone slab near the chapel. The carving is simple. Sir Aldrich of Linford, faithful. Just years pass, the hall crumbles, the fields change hands. His name becomes unfamiliar even to locals, but in the silence of the past, his life remains. Brief, real, textured, not glorious, not tragic, just lived. Would you have endured such a life? Could you have embraced the quiet, the duty without reward, the rituals that repeat without crescendo? For Aldrich, there was no other way, only the slow rhythm of the seasons, the steady march of time, mystery, archaeology, and the culture beneath the surface forgotten routines. Lost knowledge the past is not merely what was recorded by monks or written in fading chronicles. Much of medieval life, its rhythms, its customs, and its quiet mysteries lives on only in objects left behind, in silent fields where structures once stood, in fragments of pottery nestled beneath the earth, and in the hesitant lines of ink etched on parchment that has long since grown brittle with age. Imagine a wooden spoon found in a peat bog, the wood still smooth from years of use, a spoon, humble and quiet, that once stirred thick porridge over a smoky hearth, a spoon held by hands long gone perhaps by a mother humming softly to her children as dawn lit the thatch above her. These everyday artifacts whisper a language we must learn to hear. A single iron key may unlock not just a door, but an entire way of life. The size of a shoe imprint left behind in clay might tell us of the stature, the gait, and the health of the person who wore it. Bones of livestock show us what people ate and what they could not afford to. Sometimes, the mysteries unearthed raise more questions than they answer. Burial sites in medieval England, for example, often contain bodies laid to rest in a peculiar position, facing away from the church or held down with heavy stones. Were they feared, condemned, or simply misunderstood? The archaeologist's brush, moving gently across stone and soil, becomes a kind of time traveler's tool. A broken brooch reveals styles and influences carried from far-off places. Even seeds found in medieval latrines speak volumes about trade, nutrition, and climate. Yes, even waste can be a doorway into understanding. We also discover what people valued, what they feared, and how they coped with uncertainty. Amulets made of bone, copper, or carved wood were often buried beneath doorways or sewn into clothing protection, perhaps from illness or misfortune. Not because they lacked faith, but because they sought control in a world governed by mystery. As you imagine these small discoveries, try to picture the lives behind them. Not kings or knights this time, but the washerwomen, the shepherds, the bakers, the ones who never appear in grand paintings, but whose quiet contributions built the world we now study in fragments. And yet, there is still more to uncover. Let us move deeper still, beyond the domestic and into the realm of the symbolic. Symbols, sacredness, and the invisible world beneath the surface of daily life. Medieval people lived in a world thick with meaning where dreams could be omens. Stars could influence fate, and illness could be as much a spiritual affliction as a physical one. You might not have survived in the medieval world simply because you would not have understood its signs or believed in them. Imagine stepping into a medieval cathedral, your feet echoing across stone worn smooth by generations. Overhead, stained glass windows scatter colored light across the floor, blues and reds, dancing like spirits in the air. Each window tells a story, not just of saints and sinners, but of an entire universe ordered by divine logic. Even outside the church, symbols ruled the world. A circle carved into wood could ward off misfortune. A bell ringing in the distance could signal not just time, but safety or danger. Calendars weren't simply marked by days, but by feast days, fasts, celestial alignments, and saints' anniversaries. Time moved differently. It was not linear, but sacred. Events repeated in rhythm with the church, the seasons, and the stars. The medieval mind lived not in seconds or minutes, but in cycles. The cycle of crops, of holy days, of rising and falling light. There were books, of course, but not for everyone. Illuminated manuscripts, painstakingly copied by hand, often contained as much symbolic meaning as practical guidance. Margins might be filled with tiny drawings, grabbits jousting, fish with wings, cats playing harps. Nonsense to us, perhaps, but for them, perhaps a reflection of the absurdity of the world, or a private joke shared in ink across time. Even colors had weight. Blue, rare and costly, was reserved for the Virgin Mary. Red could symbolize blood, but also royalty. Black was mourning and power. And so, to truly exist in the medieval world, you'd need to understand not just the language of people, but of things. The placement of a broom, the ringing of bells at twilight, the scent of herbs in a pouch around the neck, the way one turned when passing a shrine. Every action carried potential meaning. Can you feel it? The weight of interpretation. The constant deciphering of the invisible world. It is no surprise, then, that superstition flourished, in a time when plague might descend without warning. When death came swiftly and explanations were few, the line between faith, fear, and magic blurred like fog on a moor. And so we step carefully, gently, into this symbolic realm, not to solve it, but to sit with its mystery and rest in the knowledge that some meanings were never meant to be uncovered. The world of lords and ladies. Life among the medieval elite. Stone halls, soft silks, and heavy crowns. Imagine once more the winding road of packed dirt, lined with ancient oaks. As you follow it past the outskirts of a small hamlet, a silhouette begins to rise in the misty distancer castle. Vast and formidable, its turrets scraping the dull grey sky. The sun hangs low. Bells toll faintly from a nearby chapel, and with every step toward this grand stone structure, the world begins to shift. This is not the world of ploughs and peat fires. This is the world of privilege. As you approach the drawbridge, the faint clatter of hooves and steel greets your ears. Guards in polished mail stand at attention, their livery bright beneath the overcast sky. Inside the keep, the air is thicker, cooler, scented with beeswax candles, roasted meat, and occasionally the sour musk of damp stone. The nobility of the medieval world lived in structures designed to endure sieges more than winters. Castles were not built for comfort. Their grandeur was symbolic, their strength political. Thick walls, narrow slits for windows, spiral staircases turning clockwise to disadvantage a right-handed invader. Yet, within these stern halls were signs of human effort to civilize the cold. Walls covered in rich tapestries that helped retain warmth and dampen echo. Floors strewn with rushes and herbs, lavender, rosemary, and sweet flag to sweeten the air. Large hearths roared in the great hall, though the warmth rarely reached the far corners of the room. Meals, too, told the tale of wealth. Tables groaned under the weight of trenchers, roasts, stews thickened with barley, and pies, both sweet and savory. A peacock, its feathers reattached after cooking, might be served for spectacle. Eels in jelly, gilded marzipan, moulded blamot. These were not just foods, they were declarations of dominance over nature and over hunger. But even as guests laughed over goblets of spiced wine and minstrels strummed lutes in the gallery, the eyes of the elite were always watching. A single missteps peeking out of turn, using the wrong utensil. Wearing a color reserved for royalty could undo months of careful positioning. The garments themselves were stiff with meaning. A lady's gown might be layered with silk, lined with squirrel fur or minever, dyed in rare hues like indigo or crimson. Every ring, every brooch, every embroidery, stitch communicated status. And beneath the elegant exterior, a body corseted by rules, movement choreographed by expectation. Children of the elite were groomed from infancy. Sons were trained in the use of arms, the language of diplomacy, the code of chivalry. Daughters were taught to sew, to serve, to smile even when they did not wish to. Their lives were scheduled, scrutinized, and spoken for. And yet, in quiet corners of the keep perhaps, in a sunlit solar overlooking the gardens, you might find a noble woman reading a psalter or a knight, carving a tiny animal from wood for his child. Small, fleeting moments of softness, amid a world shaped by armor and etiquette. The nobility, though far removed from the burdens of serfdom, bore their own weight. They ruled but only at the pleasure of those above them. And just as a peasant feared a failed harvest, a noble feared a failed alliance. Let us step now beyond the tapestried walls to explore the wider courtly world, where power wore many masks, and even the most gilded life came at a price. Politics, pageantry, and the invisible prison of privilege, the medieval elite lived in a constant performance, each gesture, each word part of an unspoken play, and nowhere was this theatre more refined, more treacherous than in the courts of kings and queens. Imagine the royal court at its busiest. Velvet curtains flutter with the breeze. Courtiers gather in hushed clusters beneath painted ceilings. Perfumed air is filled with whispers, alliances forming, rumors spreading, ambitions fermenting like wine in the cellars. To be visible here was to be vulnerable. Status was a currency, but also a risk. One day, a lord might be elevated, granted land, titles, even the king's ear. The next, he might be accused of disloyalty or quietly sent away. The nobility understood this dance well. They learned to flatter, to evade, to feign interest without appearing obsequious. Women, especially, mastered the delicate art of indirect influence. A favor given here, a confidence shared there. A subtle smile that could alter the course of a marriage or a war. But beyond the court's glitter, noble responsibilities stretched wide. Managing vast estates required stewards, reeves, and clerks. Land disputes, grain storage, tax collection, these were daily realities. A lord might dine with jesters at night and inspect plough teams at dawn. He might be asked to muster troops 1 month and settle a tenant's cattle dispute the next. Even religious duties were inescapable. The elite were patrons of monasteries and donors to cathedrals. They sponsored masses for their ancestors' souls, built chapels on their lands, and financed pilgrimages. Religion shaped their calendars, justified their rule, and haunted their dreams. And dreams, too, were fragile. A noble might fear an heir's illness more than an enemy's sword. They understood inheritance not just as legacy, but as lifeline. A childless marriage could end in disgrace. A sickly son might spell the end of a bloodline. But there were moments of genuine joy. A marriage feast in summer, a hunt through autumn woods, the dogs barking, the hawks circling high, a snowy Christmas court lit by candlelight and filled with music, a handwritten letter from a child away at a distant estate. These were the private treasures of the elite, small, fleeting, precious, and in the quiet of their private chambers, surrounded by ledgers, letters, and the flicker of firelight, even the most powerful noble sometimes pondered the same questions as any peasant in the fields. What legacy will I leave? Will the world remember me kindly? And what awaits when my titles turn to dust? Because in the end, all noble houses fell, all names faded, and the stone towers that once reached for the sky would one day crumble into moss-covered ruins. And so, even the lords and ladies, wrapped in velvet and draped in privilege, lived with an unspoken truth that survival was never guaranteed and peace was always borrowed. Let us now descend from the high towers and walk together into the shadowed chapels and hushed beliefs that gave the medieval world its spiritual rhythm. Into Segment 5, Faith, Fear, and the Afterlife. 5. Faith, Fear, and the Afterlife, a world of saints and shadows. It's early morning once again. A low mist curls over the fields like a quiet breath. In a small village, a bell tolls dull and echoing. Its sound is not just a call to prayer. It's a signal to the soul. In medieval Europe, life was not merely lived. It was watched, weighed, measured by forces both divine and demonic. Everything you did, every word you spoke, every stray thought was recorded somewhere beyond the veil. God saw, the saints saw, and perhaps, in the shadows, something else did too. Religion was not an abstract belief, was the pulse of time itself. The day began with matins, then prime, then at intervals, the faithful paused to acknowledge God's presence, whether in silent prayer or by kneeling beside the hearth. Churches stood as both spiritual centers and physical anchor-stone sanctuaries at the heart of every town, village, and city. Even travelers looked for them first, on the horizon, like sailors seeking stars. Inside the chapel, the smell of incense lingered thick in the air, mixing with the must of old stone and candle smoke. Light filtered in through narrow window shafts of gold-piercing dimness. The priest chanted in Latin, his voice echoing across pews polished by generations of knees. Most worshippers didn't understand the words, but that was never the point. Faith in the medieval world was built on awe and fear. Fear of damnation, fear of purgatory, fear of sin, both personal and collective. There were demons who could slip in through dreams, witches who could curse your cattle, spirits who might linger too long. The unseen world was as alive and crowded as the living one. And so people clung to relics, a shard of the true cross, a drop of a martyr's blood, a saint's finger sealed in gold. They lit candles for lost children, paid priests to say masses for dead husbands, wove crosses from straw and blessed them with holy water before hanging them above the door. Superstition and sacred truth lived side by side. A black cat crossing the road could undo a whole week's worth of penance. A lunar eclipse meant someone somewhere had sinned beyond forgiveness. Yet it wasn't all fear. For many, faith brought beauty. Music written in praise of the Virgin Mary could lift hearts like wind through wheat. The painted ceilings of churches shimmered with heavenly visions. Stained glass windows told stories in color from Genesis to Golgotha. Pilgrimages offered escape, hope, even healing. And in the darkest winters, when crops failed and the cold crept close, belief offered something no other force could. A promise that suffering was not in vain, that justice would come not in this life, but the next. Now walk with me to the side of a monk in a scriptorium, or kneel beside a child learning the Lord's Prayer. Let's enter the quieter, internal world of personal devotion and the endless effort to prepare one's soul for eternity. Monks, mystics, and the weight of the soul in a remote monastery hidden in the folds of wooded hills, silence reigns. The walls here are thick, the corridors narrow. Bare feet whisper across cold flagstones. Candles flicker along stone ledges. This is a place carved out of timer, world within a world, governed not by kings, but by the rule of Saint Benedict. Here, monks rise in the darkness to chant prayers before dawn. They fast, they copy holy texts by hand. Their days follow a strict rhythm of labor and liturgy. Bells ring not to signal time, but to remind. All life is in service to God. The scriptorium is a sacred place. Quills scratch across vellum. Ink is made from oak gall and iron salts. Each illuminated capital is painted with Kara-curling dragon, a vine-wrapped G, a shimmering halo. To write is to worship. Every letter a prayer. These monks do not seek recognition. They seek purification. A life without vanity. A life lived for the soul. But not all religious devotion took place behind walls. In the forests, in isolated cells, lived hermitsmen and women who had retreated from the world to live closer to heaven. Some walked barefoot year-round. Others lived on little more than herbs and rainwater. A few were revered as visionaries, receiving dreams, prophecies, and glimpses of the divine. Mysticism flourished in unexpected places. A widow in France might receive visions of angels. A young girl in England might write of Christ speaking to her in a dream. These experiences were often kept secret, shared only with confessors or scrawled in coded margins. And what of the ordinary believer? In a thatched hut, an old woman kneels beside her straw bed and whispers prayers for her children. A knight, far from home, carries a small relic into battle. A child is baptized in a stone basin as church bells ring. Each soul, in its own way, longs to be saved. Death was never far in the medieval world, and so neither was the afterlife. People believed in heaven, a place of music, joy, reunion. They feared hell, a pit of fire, screaming, endless punishment, and in between, purgatory, a place of cleansing, where prayers from the living might ease the suffering of the dead. Funerals were as much for the living as for the soul. Priests blessed the body. Masses were said. Offerings were made. Graves were dug shallow, the earth often rocky and hard. A wooden cross might mark the site, or a simple stone, and long after the mourners left, the family might return, feast days, anniversaries, or whenever guilt pressed heavily enough, because medieval faith was not static. It was lived, felt, fought for, questioned, and endured. In a world without modern medicine, without certainty, and with suffering at every turn, belief gave people a story to live by and a way to hope. As you rise now, slowly, from the church pew or cloister bench, let us leave behind incense and icons. We have one final journey, to the fragile body you carry, to its limits, its dangers, and the many ways it might fail in a world so harsh. Let's continue with segment 6, medicine, misery, and the human body in peril. Medicine, misery, and the human body in peril expanded. Part 1. Aches, bleeds, and broken bones. Picture this. You wake up in a stiff wooden bed, layered with straw and wool. Your back aches not from labor, but simply from sleeping on it. There's a dull throbbing in your knee, and the wound on your hand from yesterday's work has started to redden and swell. There are no painkillers, no antibiotics, no clinics to visit or pharmacies to call. Instead, healing is left to chance, and whatever knowledge has survived across generations. The medieval understanding of the body was rooted in ancient texts, particularly the theory of humors. According to this system, your health depended on the balance of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one, you might be melancholic. Too little, perhaps choleric. The treatment, rebalancing, which could mean a variety of things. Bloodletting, most famously, done with leeches or sharp knives, depending on availability and temperament. Or perhaps a poultice of herbs: comfrey for bones, rosemary for pain, nettle for circulation. Some remedies worked, others did not. Many did harm. The village wise woman might mix honey and garlic, bind a wound with wool, or offer teas brewed from hedgerow plants. The local priest might offer holy water, a saint's blessing, or a relic pressed to the forehead. Illness was never purely physical, it was moral, spiritual, social, and if you had the means, you might call for a physician, though their services were expensive, and their methods inconsistent, a mixture of astrology, classical theory, and educated guesswork. Diagnosis might involve the color of your urine, the pulse in your wrist, or the appearance of your tongue. Surgery, when performed, was crude and terrifying. Amputations were fast, brutal, and unmedicated. Broken bones were set with splints made from sticks and cloth. Trepanation, cutting a hole in the skull to release evil spirits or relieve pressure, was practiced more often than we like to imagine. Hospitals existed, but they were not what you're picturing. Most were more like hospicized places to die, not recover. Run by monks and nuns, focused on piety rather than prognosis. Cleanliness was encouraged, but germ theory was centuries away. Tools were reused. Hands were rarely washed. Contagion spread quickly in rooms lined with beds. Even a simple toothache could become a nightmare. Infections often turned septic, and if a splinter went deep, if a cut festered, death could follow. But beyond illness, there was injury from daily life, war or accident, a fall from a ladder, a plough to the foot, a sword across the ribs. No ambulances, no morphine, no understanding of shock. And then, of course, there were the plagues. Let us go deeper now, into the moments of true collective terror, when the body failed not just individually, but across entire villages, cities, kingdoms. Plague, pestilence, and the fragility of flesh. It starts with a cough, then a fever, swelling, blackened skin, the smell of decay. You've likely heard of the Black Death, but the name doesn't capture its horror. It was not just a disease, it was a collapse, a tearing of the known world. Between 1347 and 1351, the bubonic plague swept across Europe, killing an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of the population. Imagine that. Every third person you know, gone. Entire families erased. Cities hollowed. The labor force crumbled. Prices soared. Fields were left unplanted. Priests died administering last rites. Doctors fled. Fear took root deeper than any pathogen. Infected bodies were often abandoned. Burials became mass graves. Bells tolled endlessly. People wore strange masks stuffed with herbs or clutched talismans for protection. Processions of flagellants marched through towns, whipping themselves bloody to appease a wrathful god. And when the plague passed, it came again and again, for centuries, but the Black Death was only one of many threats. There were smallpox outbreaks, measles, dysentery, tuberculosis, and childbirth, which was one of the leading causes of death for women. Babies often didn't survive infancy. Many children never reached adulthood. And then came famine. When crops failed due to flood, drought, or warfare, starvation swept the land. Bread became moldy. Rats chewed through granaries. People boiled weeds. Some ate leather bark, or worse. In all of this suffering, people tried to make sense of their pain. They blamed sin. The stars, the Jews, foreigners, cats, witches, even the air itself. And yet, somehow, they endured because, despite it all, medieval people loved. They sang, they played, they joked, prayed, wrote poetry, told stories by firelight. They nursed each other through sickness, buried their dead, mourned, rebuilt. But could you survive that? Could you withstand pain without reprieve? Loss without explanation? Illness without cure? Would your modern body, used to vaccines and cold medicine, endure a world where even water could kill you? We've come far, but we've forgotten much. Now, as we leave this world behind, this realm of mud-brick homes, cold abbeys, crowded marketplaces, and endless labourlet, your eyes close gently. Let the echoes of bells and chants and hammerfalls fade. The past is heavy, and so is sleep. You've walked the roads of the medieval world. You've felt the dirt between your toes, the sun on your neck, and the sharpness of lives lived without ease. Perhaps now, in the quiet that follows, you'll carry with you a gentler view of history, not as battles and dates, but as breath and hunger, love and fatigue. Humanity in all its aching beauty. Sleep well, traveller, you made it farther than most. The quiet echo of the past, you've walked a long road tonight. From the creaking doors of medieval towns to the sweltering fields, through candlelit monasteries, shadowed manors, noisy markets, and dimly lit homes. You've followed the thread of a life few today could bear. You've endured hunger, struggled to stay warm, fought against time, toil, and illness with little but hope and habit. You've touched the walls of castles and the bones beneath the earth. You've felt the weight of a society built on belief, breath, and the brief flicker of days that often ended too soon. And through it all, a simple truth has emerged. You wouldn't survive in the medieval world because you weren't meant to. Not because you're weak, but because the world has changed. And so have you. Your body was shaped by microwaves, medicine, and memory foam. Your mind by digital maps and lighted screens. You live in a time when suffering still exists, but so do anesthetics. When war still happens, but so does weather forecasting. When hunger is real, but so are vaccines and bridges and flushing toilets. This is not a condemnation of the present, nor is it nostalgia for the past. It is simply a remembrance of how far we've come and how far others had to walk. So tonight, as your breathing slows and your mind begins to drift beneath the surface of thought, let your final waking moments be filled with quiet gratitude for your pillow, your clean sheets, your safe bed, and perhaps, just perhaps, a touch of respect for those who came before you. Good night, wanderer. Sleep deeply. You've time-traveled far enough.